Right. Huge welcome to you all. Still got people coming in. My name's Yoni Ejo, and I'm an adoption coach and a social worker and a doctor and somebody who grew up within transracial adoption family. So I'm really pleased that you're joining us for this really hopefully interesting and informative session. I'm in the process of being assessed for ADHD myself, so it's a particularly interesting and personal subject for me as well. So welcome, and I'm really pleased to invite Anita Hempenius to introduce herself, and let's kick off. What I would be really helpful in the chat, if you don't mind, just tell us the ages of your children, if you've got children placed, and just a little bit of a pen picture about you, as much as you're comfortable sharing in comments, so that we can make sure that we're pitching it at the right level. Okay, over to you, Anita.
Okay, welcome everyone. So I'm Anita Hempenius. I call myself a positive psychology ADHD coach. So what that means is I go from a strength-based perspective. I'm also an adopter. I'm ADHD myself. One of my kids is ADHD. In fact, pretty much my entire family is ADHD or autistic. So it's like complete neurodivergent family. I work in a school as a SENCO and have done that for a long time. I've also been a teacher. So I've got all these separate parts to my experience. I first want to start by saying that we all assume that the way we are, the way we think, the way we feel, and the way we act is normal. So everyone lives in their own little universe, built up of their background, their upbringing, their environment they lived in, their experiences, and the things they've been taught, the things they've read, and the things they believe. So everyone looks at the world from that little bubble of universe. And that means that anything that comes in from the outside that is different sort of slides off, doesn't quite go in. So one of the biggest difficulties with ADHD is that ADHD has come across this so much that they come across people who just don't understand that the way they are, the way they think, the way they feel, and the way they act is also normal, but different. So that's just what I wanted to start with. This whole presentation, seminar, however we call it, is in two parts. So the first part is going to be about the brain wiring, and then the second part is more specifically about children and school. So I wanted to share my screen. Let me do that first. And let me then see if I can figure out to...
Slideshow, I think it is.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find out where the slideshow is, because everything's sort of disappearing here. Where am I?
Yeah, a bit to the right. About in the middle. Bit more, yeah, close.
It's the whole thing. Oh, here we go, view. Someone's waiting in the waiting room, and that's why
okay,
it was happening. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to use the metaphor of hunters and farmers versus farmers to show the difference with brain wiring. So if you think of the hunters as being the ADHDers and the farmers being the neurotypicals, and then we'll sort of start talking it through that way. So because hunters and farmers, they are different. They need different things. And therefore their brains are different, if you think of it in a long period of time. Okay, so I'm not saying that ADHD has come from hunters. I'm not saying that. I'm just using it as a metaphor. So if you think about focus, for example, if you think about farmers, farmers have to pay attention to a specific sequence of actions, to the little details. They have to focus on that really specific thing. They cannot be distracted. They have to focus on that, because that's what keeps them healthy, what keeps them being able to get the harvest in. Now, if you think about, so I'm just going to meet whoever's in the waiting room, if you don't mind, because it's driving me nuts. Okay,
sorry,
that's it.
Can't see it. Thank you.
So hunters, meanwhile, they have to scan all the way around them, because if they don't, they're either going to be prey or they're not being able to catch anything. So they don't pay attention to details, they pay attention to patterns. And that difference means that they can forget about the details. They don't necessarily see the details, but instead they see the patterns, they see how everything connects together. Now, what that means for ADHDers, for example, is that we tend to learn things from top down. We need to see the whole big picture first, how everything connects together, and then we can learn the detail. If you try and do it the other way around, it just doesn't go in. I've had courses where I've had to learn from
I'm on a
detail
meeting, sorry.
Right?
Sorry, if I can ask people to mute.
Oh, sorry.
Mute
I was muted. Sorry.
No worries.
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
Okay. Okay. Where was I? What was I saying?
Whole picture.
Okay, yes. So I've had to do courses that I've had to go detail first because it didn't give me an option that was different. That meant I had to go through the whole thing, detail upwards, and go through the whole course till I got to the whole main picture, and then had to do the whole thing again, because otherwise it doesn't go in. So that means that in schools, for example, quite often there will be such a focus on detail, but it means that the ADHDers are not really going to notice. They're not going to pick it up. So that was the first one. That was about focus. Here we go. Next one, orientation. So we talked a bit about the pattern things. So if you think about farmers again, so farmers, they need to be very specific about how they put the seeds in the soil, how they water the plant, not too much, not too little, how they do the harvest. They have to be really detailed. So their orientation is to detail. So God is in the details, for example, would be a farmer saying. Now, hunters, however, they have to have constant change. They analyze patterns. And so there's constant change and shifts all the way around. So change is the only constant, would be a hunter saying. So again, what that means is that if you have a child and the child is at school, they will be expected to do the same thing over and over again in lots of detail. That just doesn't fit. They can't do that. They need the constant shift and change. So if you gave an ADHD child in a school, if you gave them a real challenge, something they were interested in, and it was a real challenge, it was just on that level of real difficulty, they do better than if you give them the really easy stuff they can easily do. Because it's boring, it's detailed, it's constantly the same, lose interest. Because we are an interest-based nervous system. So it has to be interesting. It has to be a challenge. If not, it's not going to work. Okay, next one. Energy. This is a really big one for ADHDers because Think of farmers again. Farmers need to have a really slow, sustained energy to be able to go through the day, steady, but keep going. Hunters, on the other hand, they're all calm, they're relaxed, they're just lying down, and then they decide they want to go for a hunt. So then they get themselves up and they psych themselves up and they get really, let's go. And they really intense energy and they go for the hunt. They go and they kill and they deal with the whole thing and then they crash. So it's like the whole energy, what a farmer might have in a day, is pushed into a few hours. And that is what ADHDs are like. Our problem comes when we do that and then we assume, and everyone else assumes, that we can keep that going for a whole day. When we do that, that means that by the end of the day, we are just wiped out. Can't do anything after school. This is one of the reasons that I always say homework is fatal. Because by that point, the child has been in this energetic state the whole day. They can't then do something else in the evening because they're crashing. Whereas if you have the slow, sustained energy, you can go home, you can have a little rest, but then you're ready to go again. So as an adult, this took me a long time to figure out. So I have been in jobs where I would come home and I would collapse. No energy for anything. I couldn't do anything anymore the evenings. Weekends, I would sleep. Holidays, every holiday, I would be ill for a week because of this crash. So with children, it's really, really important to recognize that. Their energy goes in waves. Full energy, crash. Full energy, crash. And every one of them is slightly different. So the waves, the length of the wave is different for everyone. For me, it's a few days, usually. I can keep going for a few days and then I crash for a few days. But for some ADHDers, it's like a day or even less than a day, and then they crash. And again, school, for example, isn't really set up for it because school depends on the whole school day. Then you go home and then you do homework. And that is really difficult. Time. Well, you're all going to know this one, don't you? Time and ADHD. We're either late or we're early, but we're never exactly on time. Many ADHDers are always really late because time just runs away from them. One moment. Whereas other ADHDers, like myself, for example, I'm always early. And I don't mean 5 or 10 minutes early. I'm always at least an hour early everywhere. I've learned to take a book with me because otherwise I'm just wasting time. But both of this is exactly the same thing because both of it is about the fact that time is not linear for us. So if you think about farmers, they need to have linear time because if you don't have linear time, you don't know when to sow, when to harvest, the whole thing, you don't know. You need to have linear time. But a hunter, they need to be able to be so in the moment at that time stretches, is elastic, and everything goes in there. So ADHDers are actually brilliant in emergency. So a lot of ADHDers, or well, the other way around, a lot of emergency workers are ADHDers because we are so good at that. We are so good in those times. We see everything at the same time because we take in everything and then we deal with it. We don't panic at that time. At that time, nothing matters except for that one thing. It's like that becomes the hunt. So all of this means that we can't gauge time. For a long time, I really struggled with the simple thing of washing the dishes. It was one of these things I just could not, because for me, it was something that took forever. I had to time myself about 10 times to make sure, to really understand that actually even the longest washing up, when I hadn't done it for days, never took longer than half an hour. That meant that I could now have this picture in my head of actually it doesn't take that long. And I could set a timer and say, okay, that's the only time I'm going to do. And that would then work. So gauging time is almost impossible for ADHDers. So when you ask your child to get ready and to say like, okay, we're leaving in 5 minutes. 5 minutes could be forever. Your child's not going to know what 5 minutes is. They just have no idea. It also means that time runs away from them. So you say, okay, we've got to go now. And that, yeah, but then something happens. And then they just drift off because time is different. Predictability. So this is about routine versus change. Farmers, they need routine, they need habits because they need to do the same thing every day because that's what keeps them safe, that's what keeps them healthy, that's what keeps them working and living. Hunters, they need to be very flexible. They need to be able to change strategy in a moment's notice. They get bored sitting around. And so that reaction has to be totally different. The thing is, this is very true that we hate structure, but we do need structure. The problem is that we're really not good with structure, but we do need it. The thing is also that, you know how people always say, do something 3 times and it becomes a habit. ADHDers don't have habits. We can stack things that we do, but it never becomes an automatic thing. So if you have, for example, in the morning, you wake up, you go to the loo, you brush your teeth and you get dressed. Okay. If you have that as a set time every single day, okay, so now this time your child wakes up, brushes their teeth, didn't go to the loo. Oh, then what do they do? They're completely lost because they've lost that trajectory. Or they wake up, they go to the loo, they brush their teeth, and something distracts them. They will be ready at the front door later on in their pajamas because they lost that automatic thing because it's not like they can get back into a stack of habits. It's either you start at the beginning or you're at the end. You cannot go and join midway. So that's really important to know for your kids. So one of the ways to support that is to have, for example, a checklist on their door. Early morning checklist. This is what you do and you tick it off. That means if they get lost, they can't remember what they're doing or what they've already done, they can look at the list. Now this sounds like one of these things that they should be able to do. The whole should thing, we should forget about because it doesn't work. Okay, this is one that I think particularly for adult ADHDers can cause a lot of problems. Quite often, other people think that we are selfish because we automatically think of ourselves first. This is not that we're selfish. This goes back to that whole farmer-hunter thing. Farmers, they live in groups. They have to support each other. They are community people because that's how they stay safe. But a hunter depends on themselves only. And that is how they stay safe. So they have to think about themselves first. So that means that in any situation, an ADHD will always think of how does this impact me first. Doesn't mean they don't care about the others. It doesn't mean that they don't really want to help other people, because actually they really want to help other people. But that first reaction is always going to be about them. And so often they will be told that this means that they're rude, they're not, they don't think about anyone else, but that's not true. In fact, ADHDers desperately, ADHD children in particular, they desperately want to be liked. They want to do well. They want to help. They really want to be good. Sensitivity. This is another one. If you think about farmers, farmers don't need distractions. They just need to get on with the job, because someone else in that community will have the job of keeping them safe. They don't have to think about that. So they just need to get on with the work, nothing else. Whereas hunters, there's no one else around to keep them safe. It's just them. They cannot afford to not notice things around. They need to hear that little crackle if someone steps on a twig, or the fact that the bird suddenly stops singing. All those things they need to know. And so what that means is that ADHDers, we cannot filter things out. So where someone who's not ADHD may be able to filter out, for example, bright light, or that irritating little label in the back of your shirt that just the thought of it makes me cringe. But so other people can possibly filter that out. I cannot, we cannot. Other things as well, so noises around them. And yes, I'm very aware that half the time, the ADHDer, more than half the time, the ADHDer is probably the one making most of the noise. But that still means that the other noise around them really impacts them. So for ADHD children, quite often those noise cancelling headphones are a lifesaver, because they can shut out at least a big part of it. Really bright lights is a disaster. So that, you know, those lights they used to have, I don't know, most schools probably got rid of them now, I hope, but the ones, overhead ones that make that little buzz as well when they're on their way out. That's like, there's no chance of focusing anymore at all. So with that, it is it's being aware of this. So if, for example, you have a child who's just constantly moving about, and it's like, oh, sort of, then instead of thinking of telling them to just sit still, check with them. Is something irritating? Is your shirt, is that fabric really irritating your skin? Or are you too warm? Are you too cold? What is it? And one more, processing. Now, I want to be really clear on this, that not all ADHDers are visual processors, and not all neurotypicals are auditory processors. In fact, I'm pretty much a mix of the two. But in general, if you think about the farmer and the hunter, the farmer, what is the most important thing for them? They live in a group, they live in a community, so they need language, they need communication together. So the language, the speaking and listening is the most important. So that's how they learn. Now, if you think about hunters, they don't need language, they need pictures. They think of landscape and patterns and pictorial things around them. So they think in a visual way. Now that means that sometimes when they have to say something or they have to write something down, they first have to translate this pictorial thought into language. And that's not necessarily that easy. So the ADHD may be there, they have all these wonderful ideas in their head, but they can't put them down. Because putting it on paper means they have to put it in language, and they can't think of the words. The words are not quite there. And particularly in schools, this is really important. So if you find that you've got a really bright kid who somehow at school never gets anything on paper, it might be that they could try a speech-to-text software, for example, where they can speak it in, which is one step less. Yes, they still have to put it into words, but it's not into words and then back into writing. As an alternative, it might be they can put it down in a pictorial form, either storyboarding or one thing I used to teach my older ADHD students, so the ones that were about to do exams and things, is to write notes in a pictorial way. And I don't necessarily mean a mind map. I mean literally a picture. So everything they learned in one session, or everything they did in a revision thing, would go into one picture. So then they could store that picture, and that would then bring all the information back. So there are other ways. We don't always have to write things down. We don't always have to do that way of learning, of writing notes. I have the feeling, yep, that was the last one. So I'm going to stop sharing this. Now, this is where I would really like comments, questions on this part before I go to the next bit.
If you prefer, you could put the message in, put a question in the chat and I'll read it, or unmute yourself. I suppose for me, and Anita, is there a particular sort of approach that is better to take than others when you're talking about the quite specific needs for an ADHD child? Are there things that we can do as parents to better communicate in a way that ADHD children can access, I suppose?
One of the things is to always accept what they are saying is in that moment true for them. So if they're saying, I can't, it means they can't. If they're saying in a minute, it means they're not ready yet. If they're saying, I don't want to, it means they really don't want to. So that's one thing. Another thing is ADHD is really, really struggle with authority. They seriously struggle with authority. I struggle with authority. I always used to say, the only time I'm good with authority is when I'm in the one in authority. So I was always the one complaining in the school about the teachers, going to the head of the school to really complain about. I couldn't cope if someone said punishment, that's it, I would rebel. Because we don't have that sense of hierarchy. For us, everyone is equal. And that means that the way you work with a child is if you do them as an equal. So you discuss it. You say, okay, stuff needs tidying up. Which one would you like to do? Would you like to do pick up all your toys from the floor, or would you like to bring your washing away, or is there something else you prefer doing? So give two choices, but add a third possibility if they have something else.
Okay.
And that means you still get them to do things, but in a different way.
Brilliant. We've got some questions now. What do you think? What do you do if the child has trust issues as well as ADHD?
Yes. You never, ever, ever promise anything that you cannot 100% guarantee is going to happen. I had this with my own adopted daughter who didn't trust anyone. And I'm still, I think, probably the only one she totally trusts. And that is so important. So don't say, yeah, we might go to the cinema on Saturday. Don't ever do that. If they say, can we go to the cinema? You say, don't know. I'll let you know. Okay. Or you say, you only say yes if you've already booked the tickets and sorted everything out. Otherwise, you don't. And that goes with everything. Don't say, oh, this summer, we might go on holiday if you're not really sure that's going to happen. So with everything, make sure that whatever you say is going to happen. And if the child is, I was a Brownie leader once. And in my Brownie group, there was a girl who was adopted who had serious trust issues. And there was like an outing. And the mother came to me and she said that this girl was really wanted to go, but was terrified of being left on her own. So I said, okay, I will hold your hand the whole way through. And I did hold her hand the whole 3 hours, not letting go of her at all. Whatever I had to do, this child came with me. And it's that sort of thing that is the way to build the trust.
Thank you. Another question, what do you think is the crossover between attachment and ADHD?
That's a really difficult one, because attachment difficulties can mimic ADHD.
Mm.
And the thing is that in essence, it doesn't matter which one it is.
Yeah.
You treat it exactly the same, because ADHDers in general, even if we're not adopted, we build up a lot of series of trauma with a small t. So we build that up. And so, and our reactions to trauma is stronger. So we're more likely to get PTSD, for example. So for some reason, our reaction to trauma is stronger. So all of us are going to be a bit traumatized anyway. And that has, because that starts early on, obviously, that means that also affects our brains. So in short, it doesn't matter. You do deal with it exactly the same way.
There's some really good writing by Gabor Mate, who talks about ADHD and trauma, and his view is that ADHD is probably caused by trauma or by parenting from people who have been traumatized. And I totally agree. I don't think you can make the distinction. Another question, have we got a couple of more questions? How does the organizational skills show up for people with ADHD? Our little one likes everything in place, toys put away in the same place, coasters in the same place, etc. Always very tidy with their toys.
Yep, we tend to be either one or the other. So my younger sister is exactly like that. If everything around her isn't perfectly in order, she can't think. Unfortunately, I'm not like that. So I would love to be organized. I absolutely would desperately want to be organized, but I'm not. I am at work, totally organized there, but at home I can't. So for me, it's always been things like I have boxes everywhere because it means I can chuck things into boxes. It's like all those shoe organizers that people have next to their front door, you know, where you have to put your shoes in straight. Well, that's never going to happen with me because they're just going to be in front of it. So for me, it has to be a box where I can throw them in. And I also, and a lot of ADHDs have this whole out of sight, out of mind thing. So if something goes in a cupboard, it's lost. Goodness knows what that is. You know, it's disappeared. Don't know what it is.
A comment following on from Jane. Yes, we're very interested in this too. And some literature says ADHD is not related to developmental trauma or attachment difficulties. And yet the number of adopted kids with ADHD is much higher than non-adopted kids. I certainly saw some research, and I apologize, I can't remember which research it was, but it identified that 40% of looked after children have ADHD. So we certainly need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, there are different possible reasons for that. Because ADHDers are more likely to have risky behavior, which means unprotected sex when young, for example. So then those ones are more likely then to have children when they're young. And because ADHDers are executive functioning, so our rational thinking part develops later. So if you then have 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds with a child, that is like having an 11 or 12-year-old with a child. So chances of that going wrong and this child ending up in care is greater. So that's one part of it. And I also think that the whole thing with Gabor Mate is I don't think that trauma causes ADHD. What I do think is that if you're predisposed, if you already have that ADHD brain wiring, trauma intensifies the problems with it.
Gosh, we've got quite a few questions. I'll go through them quickly. Is there a link between fetal alcohol syndrome disorder and ADHD?
I don't know, but I would not think so, because fetal alcohol syndrome is such a specific that's really brain damage. Whereas ADHD to me is about brain wiring differences. But I have to say, I can't say that for certain because I've not researched that.
I was looking at some video about adults and risky behavior and the link between ADHD and alcoholism or drug dependency and stuff like that. So I guess it might not be a direct link, and obviously that's not everyone's experience. Nicola was saying that the difference between or the explanation of trauma or ADHD does matter in terms of diagnosis and support, but I guess some of the support is going to be the same, isn't it? Whether it's ADHD or trauma, some isn't.
Sorry,
Yeah.
can I just sorry,
Sure.
can I just qualify what I meant by that? I understand what you mean in terms of how you might deal with somebody with the ADHD and somebody with attachment is the same, which I think is what you mean, Anita, isn't it? Is that you would do the same things, but in terms of as an adopter, in terms of getting support that we need for our children, you know,
right, see what I mean. Yeah,
you can't get an attachment diagnosis in the same way that you can get an ADHD diagnosis. So actually it does matter in terms of trying to, you know, EHCPs and trying to get the support in that sense. But I hear what you're saying, that in terms of the strategies we might use might be the same.
Yes.
That's absolutely the case. And working with CAMS a lot, sometimes you can see that people are trying to push you down the behavior route rather than dealing with the support that looked after children need. And in terms of what percentage all children have ADHD, I don't know offhand to compare the figures.
To be honest, I think there's so many that are undiagnosed. It's really hard.
Yeah, particularly girls.
Yeah, because also people have this idea that neurotypical people is a norm and everything else is not normal. But actually, autistic children, dyslexic children, dyspraxic children, ADHD children all fall under the normal part, still normal. And so it's quite difficult to say because we're living in a neurotypical world, which means that everyone adapts. I was diagnosed age 56 because it was never picked up. And there's going to be a lot of people like that. And it still goes with children. I have seen so many children that I look at and I think, well, that's ADHD, but no diagnosis. Shall we go on to the next part?
Fine.
And then there can be more questions after that. Right, let me just figure out this one. Okay. Share screen. And view. Reading view. Oh, making it bigger would be good too, wouldn't it? Okay, hang on. Right, so this is ADHD. So just a bit, ADHD, the name is wrong, okay? We're not deficit in attention for starters. We have too much attention and we can't quite choose what we focus it on. We are definitely not deficient in attention. Hyperactivity, not all of us are hyperactive. Or if we are, quite often it's not necessarily physical. My hyperactivity is cognitive. Basically, my mind never, ever shuts up, ever. I always have music running through my head. I forget to turn the radio on, or I think, oh, let's turn the radio on, and not realizing it's already on because the music in my head drowned it out. Going to sleep is a nightmare because my mind won't stop. And disorder, again, it's not a disorder. We fall under the normal. This is not a disorder. This is just a difference in brain wiring. And the whole thing is with ADHD, if you think about the name, the number one symptom isn't actually mentioned, which is the emotion, the difficulties with regulating emotion and the intense emotions. So I tend to to describe it as, if you think of neurotypical people, their emotions being like a still pond. You know, there might be a wind might come and you might get some little waves, but that's about it. Now, if you think about ADHDers, we're an ocean. We've got big waves. And on occasion, a tsunami comes through and causes havoc, but it does disappear again. And that is how intense the emotions are. Now, couple that with a lack of inhibition, being really impulsive. This is where ADHD children struggle, not just with their parents, but also with their siblings, with peers, and then take as an extra, take the fact that our executive functioning skills develop slower. So we haven't got that rational brain early on. This is why there are so many problems with emotion regulation. So the biggest, best thing to do for a child that is having, that is about to completely explode, or that is exploding, is to stay calm yourself. You do not learn self-regulation unless someone co-regulates you. And co-regulation isn't about talking. It is literally about staying calm yourself, because our nervous systems, they talk to each other. So you have to be there. You don't have to say anything. You can just say, I'm just staying with you. Don't tell them it's not that bad, because actually for them it is that bad. They may say they want to kill you. They may even mean it at that moment because they are that angry, they're that upset. But you need to stay calm. And that's a really hard thing to learn. I can tell you that much. It's really hard. But it is the one thing that is guaranteed to work. To get them to calm down, you need to be calm. And that's the biggest piece of advice I can give you, to learn to stay calm. So whatever they say, don't even hear it. Goes away, goes over your head. Okay? They tell you they hate you. That's fine. They tell you they, I don't know, they wish they were dead. Goes over their head. All of it, don't listen to it. Not in a way that has an emotional impact on you. You need to stay calm. Right, the next bit is about our interest-based nervous system. Now, what this means, and this is particularly important in schools, is that if we're not interested, we cannot learn it. It's not just the same as being bored. It is a complete impossibility to learn something. It just can't. There's a complete paralysis that comes with it. So if you have a child and they really hate history, they're just like not interested at all, and they get really bad grades, well, frankly, it's like, that's it. Just let it happen. Doesn't matter. There'll be something else they're good at. Yeah. So this whole thing that children have to learn everything, if you take that into the adult world, we don't do that. You know, by the time we leave school, we're only going to be learning the stuff we want to learn. So just accept that for ADHD children too. Yes, they go to school. Yes, they're going to be in those lessons, but they're not learning. It's fine. Couple this with that whole thing of, and I want to talk a bit further about that, the fact that executive functioning skills develop slower. What that means is that we are longer in an emotional state, if you think of it that way. So you get a thought coming in, okay? If it's a positive thought, normally it goes straight, you get like a sort of gatekeeper, and it goes to the rational thinking thing. If it's a negative thought, it gets looped around and it stays in the emotional thing. So in some strange way, it's as if we get stuck there in that emotional part. So the rational thinking thing is just not developed as quickly. So what this means is that you've probably all noticed it. If you have a child, an ADHD child that's older than 11, you'll know that that's where it hit. By age 11, suddenly life becomes really difficult for them. Suddenly they really struggle. Even if they didn't before, they really struggle. The reason is that so much more is expected of them in terms of executive functioning skills. They're expected to be organized. They're expected to be on time. They're expected to remember all their stuff. So all this stuff, and this is the stuff they cannot do yet. Most ADHDers have done most of their learning after they left school. I did my undergraduate degree in my mid-30s. I'm currently halfway through a master's. I have not stopped learning since I left school. But at school, I left school early. I disappeared. I couldn't cope anymore. So this means that by the time we expect our kids to do exams, age 15, 16, it is as if you're asking a 10 or 11-year-old to do exams. They cannot do the whole revision. They just can't. They're not able to do it. When they're really bright, suddenly everything will flow into them all the way through. And then there's like a point where it no longer works. With me, that was age 15. Suddenly it's just stopped working. So before that, I'd never done any homework. I'd never done any studying. Exams zoomed through them. But then suddenly it no longer happened. I was 17. I did my GCSE equivalent. It was after that. So suddenly it no longer worked. And then these kids, they've not learned how to learn. They have no idea how to learn. They don't know what to do. So what that means is that all the other kids, because their executive functioning skills were so much further ahead, they've had a lot of time to learn how to study. Our kids haven't. They suddenly get there when they're not ready for it. So I always say, yes, by all means, kids go to school, do their GCSEs, do their A-levels, but don't stress about it. I've always said to my kids, I don't care. You can do it later. Yes, if you want to do it, do it. Focus as much as you want, but it's not necessary. So I had one that had about 23 GCSEs, I believe, and the other one had 2. So this is how different they were. And they're both doing great now. So this is the bit I was talking about. Our executive functioning skills tends to be mature around the age of 30 rather than the age of 21. So any of you that are ADHD, you probably suddenly had a point where things became easier, where suddenly you could learn, you could actually sit down and study, which I tell you, for me was a real shock. And that means that the typical school is not set up for ADHDers. It is not in a lot of ways, but particularly not in this, because things are expected of them that are unfair. And then if you combine that with the fact that they have to sit still the whole time, it's just, it's fatal. Then there's a working memory. Yes, if they say they don't remember, they don't remember. Some people have a working memory that is the equivalent of a giant chalkboard. Mine is that of a postage stamp. About 3 things fit on it. The 4th one falls off, something falls off. And the thing with working memory is that you cannot retrieve it. It's not like you can think, oh, where was I when I did? No, it doesn't work. Working memory, when it's gone, it's gone. And that is important to recognize as well. So if you ask, working memory does, from early age onwards, does grow slightly, but only as far as it will go for each individual. So your 17-year-old might have the same working memory that most 3-year-olds might have. You know, a 3-year-old, you're not going to give a list of stuff to do. You're going to tell them 1 or 2 things at a time, right? Well, that's what you do here. Tell them 1 or 2 things at a time, not lots. Because if you give them lots, they might remember one of them, but it's probably the least important one because that's the one they really liked. So school life and the ADHD year. And this is something that might be really good for you to remember to tell to the school. If you give children detention during break, you are so going to regret it, because this is their chance to regroup, to get rid of all that extra energy, to build up some energy, some focus in that break by running around, playing, doing all that stuff. If you don't give them that, the afternoon is going to be absolute hell. And movement is essential. Movement breaks are some of the best things. So in schools, most schools have TAs, teaching assistants. So if a teaching assistant is able to just several times during the day, just take an ADHDer out, get for a little run around the block, or the playground, or even better, some of those sensory, call those, movement walk things, like a sort of, sorry, this is where my brain suddenly, I can see it in my head, but the words don't quite come. It's like where you have a trail and you have to hop a few times, and then you do some star jumps, and then you might do some joggling, and that sort of thing is even better because it involves their brain as well. That will make the biggest difference. Exercise in general is really good for ADHD. There's two types of exercise. So there's the really active, the running, the sports, all that sort of stuff. That one is great immediately for focus. It works on everyone, but it works more so on ADHDers. The other one is the slower exercise, things like some martial arts, yoga, all that sort of stuff. That is really good to, over a long period of time, learn focusing skills. So both of those are absolutely brilliant. And like I said before, if they say they don't remember, they really do not remember. There's no point telling them, well, you should remember, because they don't. They just cannot remember it. I think most teachers really don't know that one enough. Just tell them, he really doesn't remember, or she really doesn't remember. And this is what I said before, giving orders may not work. Because you've probably heard of pathological demand avoidance. Well, I think ADHD is pretty similar to that in a slightly different way. It's not necessarily pathological demand avoidance, is more about a certain anxiety is attached to that. That's not the case with the ADHDers. It is more that we do not recognize authority. So who are you to give me an order to do something? Plus, if you tell an ADHDer to do something a specific way, it means they can no longer do it that way. This is one of these really weird things. If you give an ADHD a specific thing of, you need to do that first, and that, and that, and this is what the whole thing should look like, and here is an example of it, can't work, can't do it anymore. They've got to find their own way. They have to find their own way of doing something. So if you give an ADHD a project, you can give rough guidelines. Please don't tell them, this is where the introduction goes, and the introduction needs to have this, this, and this in it, because that stops all creativity. And ADHDers are very creative thinkers, and we need that to keep the interest going. Yes, rewards and punishments do not work on ADHDers. They just don't. They depend on a longer term thing, and we haven't got that. We are living the moment. For us, there is now and there's not now. And now is about 3 seconds long. Okay, so rewards, what's the point? You give a reward for something that's happening way in the future. No, you can. I'm not saying you can't celebrate things. So if you have a child and they miraculously, spontaneously tidied their room, yeah, go and give them an ice cream or treat them on something. But don't say, if you tidy your room every day this week, by the end of the week, I will take you out. That's never going to work. It's just going to put so much stress on this poor child that it does the opposite of what you want. Punishments also don't work because they're really unfair, because they're not connected to anything you're doing. Natural consequence is a different thing. So if you have a child and they, okay, let's think. Okay, you have a child, they have a friend, and they've hit the friend over the head. Now the friend doesn't want to play with him. Your child comes to you, says, Ronnie, I want to play with him, but he doesn't want to play with me. Well, no, you hit them over the head. That means they are not going to want to play with you. That's how it works. That's a natural consequence. If they break something, television, they had a wonderful television in their room. You know, the old television that you had downstairs, you got a new one, they put the television in their room. They love it, absolutely adore it. They get angry and they throw the remote at it and television smashes. Well, what's the natural consequence of that? They no longer have a television. Works great. So with everything, this is what works, this natural consequence. And I want to add a bit to this because ADHDers by the age of about 11 have had 20,000 more negative criticisms than a non-ADHD child. They only ever hear when they're doing something wrong. What I would say, always notice what they're doing and mention it when they do something good. So for example, your child never tidies up, never does anything, but you notice they picked up a toy and put it in its place. Just one toy, nothing else. You don't have to say, oh, this is brilliant, you did that, because that probably embarrassed them. But what you can say, I noticed you picked up the child and put it in the right place. You picked up the toy and put it in its right place. Just noticing. ADHD children are desperate to be noticed. They're desperate for that attention because they only ever get negative attention. To give them the attention in a positive way. That was the end of that one. So I'll stop sharing. So this is when we can, have you got time for?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. There's a couple of comments that came in while you were talking. I hope this is okay to share, Tracy. My husband is in his 50s and waiting for an assessment. Everything that has been said so far in this session sounds exactly like him. And Catherine, my husband in his mid-40s, believes he could have ADHD, as he says he feels like his mind just never switches off, just like what you've said, have you described, and he struggles to sleep and can't concentrate on more than one thing due to the noise in his head all the time. Thank you. Nicola, you haven't mentioned low dopamine. Could you say how this impacts you?
The low dopamine thing is connected to the intraspase nervous system. So for us to get started on a task, it means you need, I call it activation energy. It's really dopamine, but I like the activation energy. So if you think about chemistry, okay, chemistry at school where you burn something, that's called an exothermic reaction. Now for that, you need to give it a little bit of heat first before you get the reaction. And that little bit that you have to give it is activation energy. We really need activation energy to get anything done. So we need the dopamine. So that means that it can either be something you love doing, that would give you that energy. You don't have to do anything else. If you love doing it, it will happen. For the rest, what you can do is lower the amount of activation energy that is necessary. And the way to do that can be to cut down the task to very small ones, so it is easier to do it. So instead of giving instead of telling them they have to tidy their room, their entire room, tell them to just put the washing in a basket. That lowers the activation energy necessary. And it's a short-term thing and it can happen. And once they've done that bit gives them the little bit of activation energy for the next task. The other one is to do it by cutting down the amount of time I use that one a lot. It's called the Pomodoro method. So you can actually download apps that do that for you. So you can set it so that, for example, you say you're going to work for 20 minutes and then you have a 10-minute break. And you set it like that, and it tells you 20 minutes, and it gives you a time to stop. And then 10 minutes later, time to start again. And that means that because this whole thing with time with us, that everything feels endless, 20 minutes, you can sort of see, you can, for children, it might be a lot less, might be 5 minutes, but that's fine as well. I've often worked, as a teacher, I often worked in bursts of 5 minutes. If I got a child, ADHD child, who just focused for 5 minutes, that was like brilliant. That was the best. Then they can do something else, and then they come back to it. So that's another way to cut down that activation energy needed. And each time you do something like that, it gives you a bit of that energy. The other thing is making things fun. To be honest, being an ADHD teacher is really helpful because I automatically made everything fun because it wasn't necessary for me. So I would have quizzes. We didn't do tests, we had quizzes, like pub quizzes. So we shifted and changed everything all the time. And that sort of thing, again, that gives you that little dopamine burst.
Okay.
There is this thought, I know there's this, a lot of research says that we are deficient in dopamine. I think it's more that we naturally have less dopamine, and that comes back to that whole different brain wiring. I don't think it's a deficiency. I think it's just a natural difference.
Thank you. Samantha asks, would a visual timetable not work with an ADHD child? My daughter gets angry if I ask her to do anything.
Yes and no is the answer. Yes, the visual thing is good, but no if you set specific times on it. So if you do a visual checklist, yes, definitely. Especially if it's a visual checklist that they can do it in different orders. Yeah, which one shall I do first? Because that gives them a bit of autonomy again. There's this thing called self-determination theory, in which like the end result is that you do things because you are because you want to. So you're internally motivated. Now, to be honest, ADHDers are right there. That's what we are. You know, forget working our way to it. That's who we are. We are internally motivated, and otherwise it doesn't happen.
Thank you. How do you balance parenting when one parent, I'm thinking, believes the child has ADHD, but the other doesn't, and you're struggling to get a diagnosis?
This is really hard. This is one of the reasons why, because it's not just as parents, it can also, when one of a couple is ADHD and the other one is not, for example. This is why I started working very much with the communication between ADHDers and non-ADHDers, to try and find some sort of language together that you can communicate, because it is really, really hard if you have a partner who doesn't believe it, who just thinks that your child's just their child is just misbehaving. And with that, I would say the very first thing to try and explain is that all behavior is communication. Any misbehaving means there's something that's saying, that's a language. But I agree, it is really difficult. And drip feeding information would be my thing. Little drip by drip information. Don't try and sit them down and give them a lecture about ADHD. But drip feeding little bits might work.
Thank you. Jane said, yeah, and if I try any pace or any other type of parenting, I get screamed at. Yeah, I can hear and sympathize with that.
Well, there is, what's it called? The nurtured heart approach, which is described as being for intense children. So not specifically ADHD, but intense children. And that has this, what I said about this noticing thing, it has that very much in it. There is a book, but the book is old, and the book, they've still has reward and punishment stuff in it, which afterwards they took out. So just that, you know, if you buy the book, ignore that part. But it's very much about noticing. So if you think about it, what we focus on is what grows. If you always focus on the negative, that part grows. So that's why focusing on the positive, it helps. It makes the positive grow. It makes them do that. I mean, all of us, what are you more likely to do? If you have a boss and you've made a mistake and your boss comes in and just really tells you off about it, you're going to be terrified doing anything in the future. If, on the other hand, you get the boss coming and saying, look, we've just noticed this, what happened? You're more likely to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I made a mistake. And then say, okay, that's fine. How can we stop this happening in the future? That's a totally different approach. And I want to make clear that when I say focus on the positive, it doesn't mean saying, oh, you were so clever, because that's a negative in itself, because that forces them into a little box. So don't say you're so good at maths. No. Your noticing will be on the effort they're putting in on something.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to clarify that part.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? Reward effort and not achievement, or not the outcome.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think there was one more question, I think. Sorry, I lost my place a little bit. Any recommendations to enforce boundaries and or apply consequences? And this is from Mark.
I would say there's that book, or you can also look it up online, The Nurtured Heart Approach by Howard Gardner. I love that one because it is so, there's no emotional attachment given to whatever you're doing, which to me is really important. Also in teaching, it's the same thing. If you put an emotional attachment to whatever you're doing, everything's wrong. Everything goes wrong. So when you give a consequence as a teacher or as a parent, it has to just be flat. You know, this is it. That's the natural consequence. There's no arguing about it. This is just the way it is. You know, you break something, it's no longer there. That's it. It's like, no anger, no nothing. That's just the way it is. So I would say that's my biggest one that I would suggest. I would also say there is, if you go to the website, I think it's called mindsetkit.org. There's a thing for parents on teaching the growth mindset, and that in itself is a really good one to work with kids with.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just conscious of time, and what would be wonderful if you do get a chance to just put any comments on how you found this session. Just to say that Anita and I are running a series of seminars to go into a bit more depth with these issues, covering session 1, the lack of hierarchy in ADHD brains, what that means in terms of our children's organizational skills or adults, how children with ADHD relate to people, session 2, the impact of a different time perspective, and I certainly can sympathize with that, having ludicrously estimated how long things take or how far away I am from things, and the 4 session school and the child with ADHD, and we're running those from next Monday for the subsequent 4 Monday evenings. And if you are interested, I think this is going to be something that we're going to run again. It will certainly be at a higher cost because this is the first time we're running it. So we're looking, I've put a link in the